Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're making this look, and it's a little bit different format today. I was going to be shooting just a quick reel, and I figured, hey, why not go ahead and do one of those color grade and chill type episodes, except this time it'll be in real time, and you guys will be able to walk through the entire process with me as I explain it. And really, we're just going to be given this clip shot by my friend Theo, or I guess this is actually Theo, shot by his team. We're going to be working to give this a sci-fi look. And basically, I'll just be doing the same process I would follow if I was working on any kind of a feature film or short film, anything like that. This will just kind of be based on my own creative discretion, and I'm going to follow the color management tactics that I teach in my course. But if you'd like to learn more about this entire process, my color grading course, The Colors Blueprint, does walk you through everything from start to finish. The course covers everything from importing your footage to color management, to color correction, grading, shot matching, and how to make sure everything renders from Resolve looking accurate as it did in your display. The course does close on Friday for about a month or so before we reopen, so if you're interested, jump on it now while you can. Use that code LASTCALL at checkout, and I hope to see you guys in there. And with that out of the way, let's jump into my overall process for building a look. And so the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is color management. And this is where we're going to take a color space transform. And in this first color space transform, we're going to take our camera color space and convert it to DaVinci Wide Gamut. So to do that, we're going to select our input color space, which should be DaVinci or Blackmagic Design Wide Gamut Gen 4. And then the input gamma is going to be Blackmagic Design 4.6K film. And that's going to get us set up to currently a Rec. 709 output. And that brings me to the next point. We're going to go into our settings right here. And for color management, we're going to be using DaVinci YRGB. Timeline color space is going to be DaVinci Wide Gamut. And the timeline color space, if there's any confusion there, it is not going to change anything except for how some of the tools operate. It is totally independent of your export settings. So output color space, that's where we're going to go in, and we're going to set this to Rec. 709 Gamma 2.4. And then we're going to hit save. And now you notice everything changes, but that's not because the timeline color space has an effect on our output settings. It's only because our output color space and output gamma right here in the color space transform are set to use timeline. And since the timeline color space is DaVinci Wide Gamut, that's why it looks like that. So we're going to set this to DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate right here. And we're going to set these two to none because we're going from scene referred to scene referred, so there's no need to do any tone mapping yet. And now we're just going to rename this node to IDT. That stands for Input Device Transform. And so now we're going to copy this node using Command C and then paste it over at the end here. And then we're just going to rename this one to ODT. Now our output settings are DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. We're going to swap these two, put that to DaVinci Wide Gamut as the input, and then set our output color space to Rec. 709 and the output gamma to Gamma 2.4. And that's going to handle all of our color management right here. Last thing we're going to do is change tone mapping to DaVinci, and then the gamut mapping to saturation compression, and we're done. Everything is properly color managed. We're looking at Rec. 709 right here. So now we're actually going to start building the look, and we're going to build the look in the DaVinci Wide Gamut color space between these two nodes. So these two are just going to go way over here. These nodes effectively act as our color management system for this project. You could also use your project level color management if you wanted to. You can use DaVinci YRGB Color Managed or ACES or whatever you like, really. That's where it's up to you. And my typical preference is just to handle all my color management in the node tree. And you can use groups for that. You can do it in your timeline node tree, whatever you prefer. So if you're wanting to learn more about why you need color management in the first place, like I mentioned, the course does cover all of that. It should answer all your questions. However, if it doesn't for some reason, I also give you one-on-one access to me. So you can just text me with whatever questions you have and I'll text you right back. So it's that easy. Now that we've got our color space transform taken care of, we're just looking at our Rec. 709 image. It's time to start adding our look here. I'm going for something kind of dark and moody, some cool tones, kind of underlying everything. And then, kind of a little bit of a bleach bypass look here. So the first thing I'm going to do is start working with some primaries, and I'm going to do that underneath a second node, which is going to be giving us some additional styling, and we're going to do that through Look Designer. So Look Designer is a plugin that I use quite often. I also use Film Convert. I also use Dehancer. It really just depends on what the project calls for. However, I know that this one, I'm looking for a specific film stock, and Look Designer gives me the quickest access to that. So we're going to go into DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate as our input, and same for our output, is that's how we've set things up here. And you could almost think of the color space as it's flowing through the pipeline as languages, and we're translating from one language to the other. So whenever this footage got into our system, it was in Blackmagic Design film. And we wanted to translate it to DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. It's almost like if you had English and you wanted to translate it to Spanish. Well, here's where we translated it to Spanish. So it's still in Spanish here. We want to make sure it stays in Spanish. And then we're going to translate it to whatever you want to call Rec 7 or 9 at the end. Something more universally understandable by our displays. Kind of a mixed up analogy there, but you could think of color spaces as languages and the color space transform as a translator. So we want to keep it in Spanish or DaVinci Wide Gamut here. So we're keeping it in DaVinci Wide Gamut. And that way, if we disable this node, you'll see nothing even happens. So now we can add our different film looks and make some other adjustments using Look Designer as a tool, and it's going to stay in its own color space. So for our negative, I'm going to choose negative stock Gen 1. Maybe we'll try a reversal stock. And I like that. So then in our print options, which are what the film would be printed to, we're going to go into Codec 2383, and that's pretty solid right there. I'm going to dial this back because I don't want it to be too strong. And then we're going to go to our print stock, and we're going to use 2383 Classic. And I'm also going to dial that back a little bit as well. We're also going to bring the crunch up a little bit, which is going to add some sharper contrast. And it's also going to kind of give us the start of our bleach bypass look. If we turn this on and off, you can see that contrast really coming in there. The crunch is getting really punchy. I'm liking how this is looking overall. And just with those few steps, we've already taken it this far. And we haven't even touched our primaries, so a lot more is to come. Now we're going to go into post-processing. I'm going to experiment, and I'm going to see if I actually like some bleach bypass here. I'm going to bring this up just a touch. Not very much is needed. You can see we've only got this to about 15-20%. Turn that off and on. It's very, very subtle, but I do like the overall output. I don't want too much saturation in the colors here because it kind of just feels too happy. I want it to still feel pretty moody. So I'm liking that as a whole. Okay, so with this as our base, I'm gonna go ahead and label this one LD for Look Designer, and then we're gonna go into our node prior, and we're gonna start working on our primaries. And so here I'm just gonna start, if I can type, I'm just gonna start working with our color wheels, and we're gonna push some things around and see what we get. And we're going to push some of our primaries around and kind of redefine the contrast here. I usually just like to go with my lift and gain at the same time. And yeah, I really like how dark we're getting. Little adjustments in our levels. And I'm actually going to separate these. I'm going to call this one levels, which will just be our lift, gamma, and gain. And then I'm going to call this one our primaries, which is actually going to focus on the color, the trackballs of our lift, gamma, and gain. So we're going to start pulling some more color in here. And later we're going to take it away. So using our lift, we're just pulling this down and to the right, giving it a little bit of a teal shadow. Then we're going to counter that with our gain, pushing some greener tones, a little bit yellow there, and then a little bit more skin tones in our gamma. And so that's what we're getting now. I'm liking that, but I'm also going to jump into our log wheels because I want to be a little bit more specific in which regions I'm affecting here. And I do kind of like some of the split toning that the log wheels offer. So I'm going to add a little more red to our highlights here. So I'm just going to give a little more of a yellow tint, complementing what we did with our primaries. That's a good start, especially if you look at his helmet here. This area right here, this patch, you can see that starting to get some other color coming in. Also with the skin tones, it's working really well. It's a little bit too yellow, so I'm going to give it a little more of a red tint overall. Dial it back some. I like that. It's very, very subtle, but it's enough. And then we're going to do the same thing with our shadows. See where they start pulling at. I don't want to take our shadow levels too low, but something right in here is looking pretty good. I'm going to add a little bit more of a blue, a deeper blue to this. And then in our midtones, I'm going to add some more skin tone color back in because I don't want to desaturate his skin too much. That's looking really, really good. Now we're going to go after our Look Designer plugin. The reason I'm going to work after the Look Designer plugin for this next step is because I want to work with the colors that our film stocks have implemented. So after our Look Designer node, I'm going to add a node here, and we're going to start working with our hues. So I'm just going to name this HSL. So in our HSL curves, the first thing I'm going to do is take the yellow anchor and just shift it, swing it to be a little bit more red. It's looking good. And then in our blues, I'm going to shift them to be a little more teal. Then we'll jump into our hue versus sat and start desaturating some of these blues. And I'm pretty much happy with that. I'm going to bring some of these blues back up just a little bit. And I think I went too far with our yellows. Actually, I don't think our skin tones need to be adjusted very much. It is going to leave that orange a little bit further from where I wanted it. So maybe we'll add a new anchor right here and just bring it up a touch. That's actually enough right there. We'll go into our red saturation now and bring these down just a little bit because we don't want that red too vibrant. And what we're trying to do here is get away with decreasing some of that red saturation without completely removing the saturation of our skin tones. And if we move through the clip though, part of that bleach bypass, I mean, we're not gonna have super saturated skin tones and that's fine. If we really needed to though, we could add a key and bring them up that way. But for this specific shot, I don't think I need it. I'm gonna be pretty much happy with where it's at right there. So now I'm gonna get into the texture phase. And so I'm gonna add some grain here. Just going to add DaVinci Resolve's built-in grain because it's the most efficient, just runs the best. It's typically the one I'm using anyways. And I'm going to go with the 16mm 500T. And we're going to turn that size up just a little bit as well as the strength. Now, as I'm looking at my reference monitor, I'm noticing we're getting a little too much green in the background over there. I'd rather it be teal versus that slight green tint. So let's jump back into our primaries and I'm going to pull a little more teal into the lift. It's a little bit better there. And then I'm also going to jump into the HSL and we're going to go to hue versus luminance and bring the luminance down on some of these blues. I'm liking where that's at. So what I am going to do here is add a little bit of a vignette. And there's a bunch of different ideas and thought processes on where to add that, where to place it in your node tree. Even I don't keep it in the same place every time. But for this instance, because we didn't need to do any exposure or white balance adjustments, corrections here, I'm just going to add it immediately after the input device transform, that first CST. So we'll name this one vignette. And then to add that vignette, we're just going to add a large circular power window. Bring this in here, make sure it's super soft. Because he's so high up in the frame, we're going to pull this up a little bit more and invert it and then track it. All right, now we're going to go through. Oh, also quick note about that. If you notice, it kind of parallaxes because of the 3D tracker. Say we don't really want that. If you go into the tracking, you just turn off that perspective 3D, we'll reset it there, and then retrack it. Do the same thing with rotate. We don't want it to rotate, we'll just turn that off. And now we have a much better version of that tracking. So now let's actually add the vignette. You can do that with the curves, you can do it with offset. I'm gonna start with our gamma and a little bit of lift. So now I'm playing with lift, gamma, and gain. So I'm just actually gonna reset them all and then just try offset. So I'm going to use offset and then I'm going to come back and add just a little more gain to keep our highlights a little bit higher than the shadows so that the vignette affects the shadows more than the highlights, if that makes sense. And let's also adjust the shape of it just slightly. Add even more softening and then make it a little bit larger. Make sure it still tracks properly, which it does. And then we'll turn it off and on. I think I'm liking that. I'm going to jump back into our primaries just to keep doing a little more work here. Because the palette is just still not quite what I had in mind. It's getting there though. You see what our primaries are doing? They're adding a little bit of different tonality in the shadows, and they're also giving a lot of warmth to the highlights, which also kind of helps these greens here fill in. So yeah, I'm liking that. I think we can also go back into our Look Designer plugin and maybe even turn up the crunch a little bit. Or maybe we bring the crunch down and then bring up our 2383 contrast. And we'll split the difference somewhere in there. Okay, that's not terrible. I actually am going to turn up the intensity of our negative stock though. So that's looking really good. Another way that I'll use the OFX tools is to add texture like I did with my grain. What we can also do is add a contrast pop. So I'm just going to do that here. I'll just call it con pop, like corn pop. And then we'll go and search contrast pop, bring it in here. And then we'll just take the detail amount and increase it slightly. And that's going to give us this effect where it really just accents some of those regions of higher contrast right here. Maybe we'll also add a texture pop. And I should mention it's important to do this underneath your grain because you don't want to add texture and contrast to your grain. So the texture pop and the contrast pop, that's all happening underneath our grain. And the reason I'm kind of going heavy with this texture and contrast here is because it's supposed to feel gritty, at least to me, that's what I want. So now with our texture pop, that's adding a lot more kind of details in the background there, texture and contrast together. You see how much rougher the image is looking now. So I'm liking that a lot. Let's do this. Let's make some room here. We'll just look at before and after. We'll disable everything and let's walk through the entire process step by step. This is our completely log image, and then we converted to DaVinci Wide Gamut and then to Rec 709 using our color space transforms. Then we started working with Look Designer to bring in some of our look and filmic elements. And then we also added some levels, which we used to add contrast using lift, gamma, and gain there. And then we worked with our primaries to shift some of those tones around, to add some blues into the shadows and some warmer tones to the highlights. Then we further refined that with our log wheels. And then we went into our HSL secondaries and started working on some of the overall color palette and started working with some of the hues, shifting some small things here and there. And then we also added a vignette to focus our attention on our subject here. And then next we added a contrast pop and a texture pop just to really emphasize some of the details in the frame here, especially with all this foliage. And then we added some grain at the end, and that's pretty much it. That's all it takes to build this look. Now, if you want to learn more about how to incorporate building a look like this into a full-scale project with the shot matching and keeping the overall look consistent for the entire film, how to build cohesiveness, and then how to actually separate different scenes and grade them accordingly, again, all of that is covered in the course. You can save a whole lot right now, so check out that link in the description. Use that coupon code LASTCALL. Doors do close in a couple of days, so if you're interested, jump on it now while you can. With that being said, thanks so much for watching. Check out some of the videos on the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.